Hello everyone, Claudia here again from We're Just Two Sisters. And today I wanted to show you how I take a glossy photo and turn it into something that looks really vintage. It's a really fun process. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but I like to use patterns and I'll show you how that works. It creates a really pretty covering to make your photo vintage. A lot of people like to use tea bags, tissue paper. This is just yet another option for taking a glossy photo. Shiny, we don't really like the shininess, but we often find great photos in magazines that we just tear out, or books that just have that gloss to them, the glare on them that we'd like to kind of make look old. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to need. So this is the end result that I think a lot of you have seen, where I took a photo from a magazine, made it look vintage, and then turned it into a pretty cover for a journal. I'll set that aside for now, and we'll talk about the supplies that I use. So first of all, this is PVA craft glue. And I like to use this instead of Mod Podge because it doesn't get quite as heavy and thick. So what I've done is I've added some to my cup here, and I have added water just to kind of lighten up the consistency a little bit. You're going to want to stir that good and until you get the consistency that kind of looks like runny glue or more thin glue that doesn't necessarily run, but it just drips a little bit. This is kind of the consistency that you want. Show you that again. Kind of runny, kind of drips a little bit, but not that much. And you're just going to want to stir that a little bit until it is the consistency that you like. And I use this brush. It's a fan brush because I like the control that it gives me. It's super soft. You can also use any brush, and I'll also use this one a little bit for the edges if I need some additional coverage on the edges. So those are the brushes you're going to use. You're going to need a little bit of distressing ink. I like this one. It's one of my favorites. In fact, the color Walnut Stain is one of my favorites. And then your little distressing tool. You're also going to need patterns. Now you can get these sewing patterns at virtually any thrift store. There's usually a section that has a bunch of them. And as you can see when you open them up, they have some really cool designs on them, but not so much that they take away from your photographs. So I'm going to actually grab a piece of this out and set it aside because they are pretty big. And I'm just going to grab one here and set it aside to use and get rid of the rest. And you can see that they're huge. This one is actually a large pattern. So what I'm going to do, just to make it a little more manageable, is just kind of tear into it so that I have a smaller, more manageable piece. And I'll set that aside as well. So let's look at some of the photos that I've chosen, and I'll give you some tips on why. So I like to find photos that kind of look old-fashioned. They look a little older, a little more vintage. I love pictures of children. Here's one that came out of a book that that actually is a really cool old vintage photo. I like flowers, but sometimes, again, they're just too glossy. I love these types of photos. They come out of books that have a glossy paper. This is one of my favorites. What if the hokey pokey really is all it's about? One of my favorite things. My sister loves that. Here's another one that came out of that same book. Here's a National Geographic, which has this really cool photo in the middle that I'm going to use. And again, the paper is nice. It's glossy. Another magazine that has really pretty pictures of butterflies and birds. Another one with birds. Here's a picture that came out of a book with these cute little mice on it. But again, it's super shiny. Another one that came out of a magazine that I love the picture, but not the glare. And last but not least, this is a beautiful, beautiful picture. I might even be able to get 3 out of this because it is fairly large for a journal, but I'm going to decide that once I get ready to actually work on that. Wanted to show you some of the materials that I got these from. So this is a little children's book, again, that I got at the thrift store. It's a Beatrice Potter book, and it has really awesome pictures. But again, as you can see, hopefully in this light, they're super shiny and super glossy. National Geographic, you'll find, has amazing photos in it, but they're all really, really shiny. And in fact, oftentimes there are series of magazines of National Geographic that are vintage in their theme. They show pictures from different eras. Birds in Bloom is something that I subscribe to, and it has absolutely beautiful pictures in it that can be used for some of your more nature journals or themes that you're working with. But again, they're super shiny and they just need to be toned down. So that's what we're going to do. This is another magazine that I find at the thrift store now and then. It's called Cloth Paper Scissors. If you haven't checked it out, it's a great magazine. And again, awesome photos, but extremely shiny and glossy. But again, things that you can take little snippets of and turn them into something completely different. And then last but not least, I love these old books. You can see this one is called American Heritage. It's an awesome hardcover book, which I'll show you I've already gutted because I will be using this for a cover if I can find paper this big. Have a struggle with finding paper that's big enough to fill these larger journals to make signatures. But anyway, wanted to show you that. Another idea is vellum. So if you have any vellum laying around anywhere that comes out of like old photo albums, this stuff also works great. I'm just going to show you just as an example. The moment you lay that down on top of this, what a difference that makes from this to this. So I'm going to show you just a couple of samples of that as well. But let's get started. So now that you have your glue, make sure that you have a background here that you can use to, paint to glue on, and you don't mess up your surface. But kind of check your glue again, and I'm sloppy, so I use the end of my paintbrush to stir this. But I like the consistency of this. It's kind of drippy, kind of not. And I'm probably going to have to fill that up a couple of times. I just don't like it to get, super thick while I'm working with it. So I'm going to take my pattern here, and I'm just going to tear off a piece that I feel is big enough for the project that I'm working on. So on this paper, this is what I want to capture here. Not necessarily all of it, but your layout is super important. So if I look through this, I kind of like these numbers. I kind of like where those lines go. So I'm going to go for it. You basically just take your glue, put it on your brush fairly liberally, and just paint onto the surface with the kind of, thinned out glue. Kind of get a good surface here. Get that on there. And then you're going to take your pattern piece and lay it down over the top of that and just kind of pat it down with your fingers. And I personally like the crinkles. I mean, you can get rid of some of them if you like, but I like them. I like it when it crinkles a little bit. Now, if in fact you're not happy with the crinkles, it's fairly easy to just pull this up and then spread it back down, especially when you're working with faces, because obviously you don't really want to have a lot of crinkles in the faces of the people that you've chosen for your project. So as you can see, you can spread these out a little bit with your finger, and already we're starting to see that crinkle effect here. When you look closely at it, you can see that it's starting to crinkle. It has that cool textured look. And again, if you got a little bit too much, you can always pat that down. And then take a little bit more of your glue and just go over the top of it. It's very similar to decoupaging, but not quite as heavy-handed as decoupaging can have a tendency to be. So I'm happy with that. I like how I can see through it. I like how my design that I really originally fell in love with is so nice there. And so I'm going to set this one aside and let it dry. I'll give you a couple of other examples of others here. Let's work with one of these birds here for a minute and see what we can do with that. So again, I'm going to take my pattern piece and I'm going to tear off a piece that I feel is going to be large enough for my subject, which is that, just the bird is what I want to concentrate on here. So that's going to work fine for me. I'm going to take my brush and dip it into my glue and just paint the subject that I'm wanting to vintage. Get some good coverage there. It's okay to go outside the edges because, you know, eventually you're going to tear these. So it's okay to go outside of the color, outside of the lines, as I like to say. So I'm going to put this here. I'm not going to cover up my bird. And again, if you have creases that you don't like, it's fairly easy to just lift this up a little bit. It doesn't tear as much as tissue paper does. And then just kind of smooth it out with your finger until you have got that look that you're wanting to achieve. And then take your brush, put some over the top. Just kind of follow the lines of your pattern paper. Spread that on there good. And as you can see, that has now turned into more of a vintage look. I would love this for like a Christmas journal. So I'm going to set that one aside. And I will grab one that's kind of a different type of paper here. This is my image that I really like right here. So, and I think I would actually like to have some lines on that one. So if I look at my pattern paper, I can actually put some lines around the outside. I could put the lines through it like this. I kind of like that. So I'm going to tear this one off. Again, no real rhyme, no reason to this. You're just going to tear it till you get a piece that's big enough. I liked that line across it like that, but I don't want to cover up her face. So I might move it down a little bit. So here's the before. Here's what it's going to look like after. And again, you just take your brush, put on your glue, and the smoother you get the glue, the less apt you are to have those wrinkles. But I'm going to put this like this because I want that line. Lift it up a little bit, not too hard to do. Can't do it too many times though. Kind of stretch it a little bit, pull it with your fingers, and then start to spread it out. I've got a crease right in her face that I'm going to fix. So I'm just going to pull that up and spread that a little further that way. I like that. And then once you have the face the way that you want it, go ahead and cover the top. Once you cover the top, you still have an opportunity here to spread this out a little bit because it gets kind of slippery. So you have an opportunity to spread that out a little bit with your finger. But doesn't that look cool? That looks just the way I wanted it to look. Much more vintage than that shiny photograph, right? I'll zoom in a little bit on that so you can see how cool that looks. So again, I'll do one more. Just while you guys are experimenting, I'll just do one more. Set this one aside. Running out of places to set aside. And I'll do this one because it's a book cover. So this one, I also think I want some lines on this one. So I'm going to look at my pattern paper and just kind of see, wouldn't it be cool if those lines are down there, or maybe even across like that? So I'm going to go ahead and tear this, get, you know, a general shape that I'm looking for. Set that aside. Look at that again. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. So again, I'm going to take my paint, and I'm actually not going to have to use more of this than I prepared for myself. So I'm going to paint that on. It's pretty easy to spread, but you want to get a fairly even spread on it so that you don't have, you know, bubbles underneath that have no paint to them. So I wanted that to show for sure, but I'm not really sure how. I don't want to cover up the cute little mice. So I'm going to go like that. And as you can see, it already completely transforms into what looks like an old photograph. Love these patterns. So spread that on. And you can see, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that a little better. Very cool. And I actually don't know what language this is. I was trying to figure that out yesterday. It's a little book that I bought in the thrift store, but I'm not familiar with that language. So if anybody knows, enlighten me on what that language is. So again, I'm going to go over the top of this, very similar to Mod Podging, but again, the patterns they just don't tear like tissue paper does. And even tea bags, I find they tear on me too easily. So there's that. Let's look at the very first one we did. It's starting to dry, and as you can see, I mean, it just looks so beautiful. Look at the difference between before on this paper and after on this paper. So that's pretty much it. You let them dry, and then you basically just tear or cut around the edges, whatever, you know, you'd like to take out of this. I also find that it's cool to take an entire page and even do this over the writing, over the text. And now you've created what was a modern looking page into something vintage. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you were inspired by this, and I'd love to see what you create. You can check out more of our stuff on we'rejusttwosisters.com. That's www.we'rejusttwosisters with the number 2.com. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.